Hey, what's up, guys? All right, so as promised, I wanted to talk with you just a little bit today about bunting. So yesterday we talked about stolen bases and how difficult it is to figure out like when you should steal when you're running a replay. It really is a problem. If you have any experience with these replays, you know exactly what it is I'm talking about. It's not easy to figure out like what time or when it is that you should steal and when it is that you should forget about stealing and just go ahead and do things the way that they're normally done, the way that the results naturally come. But I would argue that it becomes even more difficult when you're talking about sacrifice bunts because it's very, very hard to figure out like what was the appropriate time, what was the appropriate time to bunt, which situations guys would bunt in, which situations guys wouldn't bunt in. All of this stuff that like you would look at and think, oh, this is easy. Oh, easy. You can easily figure this stuff out. You know, it would be obvious that you would do it in this situation or that situation is actually kind of hard to figure out. So we'll go ahead and we'll look and we'll see if we can come up with some sort of idea of when to do this. Let me switch over here to the screen view, make sure that my head is not covering everything, and it's not. And look, they kept the text high at 150%, so it did what I wanted it to do. Very good, Firefox. Thank you. So when we look over at the National League screen of Baseball Reference, what we're looking for is go under batting and then league splits. I already have it open here. And this will give you sort of an idea of what's going on. What we're interested in here are the sacrifice hits. And as it says in parentheses, sacrifice bunts. The first problem that we have that all of you smart Alex are going to come up with right away is that sacrifice hits might also include sacrifice flies. It's possible. It's difficult to say. To be honest with you, I think you'd have to go through all of the play-by-play records to figure out exactly what's going on. And I believe that a lot of these numbers are coming directly from the play-by-play records, so they may not be complete for the entire season. All right, but we can look at this and just come up with some sort of basic ideas. Really, if we want to do this right, we need to break down different situations and look at percentages, right? So the problem that you have, you can see right here, if we're looking at batting order positions, for example, you can see that the plate appearance difference between the guy hitting first and the guy hitting ninth is pretty significant. We're talking about 1,000 plate appearances in the season, right? Or at least among the statistics that we currently have. That's a pretty significant difference, right? And we should be looking at the percentage of these plate appearances that are sacrifice hits. As you can see here, though, interesting thing about 1908 that we see right off the bat, at least in the National League, is that a good number of plate appearances for the guy hitting number 2 in the order were actually bunts. My assumption here is that you get the guy hitting first on with a single or with a walk, and then the next thing you do is you want to bunt him over to second base. I haven't been playing it quite like that, right? Because I prefer to put my good OPS guys up in order. Normally I'd have this number 4 guy hitting first instead of this weak guy, and you'd have like 4, 3, and then 5, something like that. So, I mean, you play it one way or another, but and we can argue about the strategy, but that's one thing that you can look into and sort of keep in mind as you do the strategy for yourself. You can look at it team by team. You might think, oh, it's not going to make much of a difference. It did in real life because the difference between the Superbas, who were not very good, certainly not superb in 1908, with 254 bunts, is significantly different from the New York Giants, who only had 154, right? This is something that the offense has control over because they call for the bunt. You think that John McGraw called for the bunt a lot, but I would say he probably called for it a lot in places where it was important. And look at this. Winning percentage under 500, they call for so many more bunts than those who have winning percentages over 500. That itself could be a sabermetric article. That right there, you could probably write an entire article about. You can look at it demarcated by all sorts of stuff, including ballpark. We're not going to go too deep into that. What I wish that we had, which we don't, is the bunt totals broken out by the on-base situations. It takes a couple of years, I think, before Baseball Reference gets to that. I can't remember which year it is, if it's like 1915, 1916, something like that, before it includes those kind of totals. The reason why is because the game-by-game records or the play-by-play records are still so incomplete. But so this basically is going to come from your box scores is what's going on. You also, like I was alluding to, you're actually not going to be able to figure out how many are sacrifice bunts versus sacrifice hits. We'd have to get more box scores first for that to be possible. Here's the American League. We picked it up the same way using the same method. And we're just going to look here to batting order position. And yeah, look at that. A huge number of number 2 hitters were bunting in the American League. That was definitely the popular strategy. Interesting, and I bet that you probably don't play like that, but that's the way that it was in real life. And you do expect there to be a little bit of like a sliding down scale because of this plate appearance difference, but this is very significant. It's very significant, about 200 more bunts from that number 2 position. That was a strategy at the time, and it was commonly accepted. Here, you're not seeing a huge difference between winning and losing teams in terms of their propensity to bunt. Both teams were equally likely to bunt, and you're not seeing that huge gap between sacrifice hits. Again, the raw totals are not that important. It would be nice to have percentages. It's set up so that you probably would have to go and figure that out yourself. So anyway, that gives you kind of an idea, at least for 1908, kind of the way that we're supposed to play this. And in other words, instead of necessarily having, everybody bunt, the actual strategy tended to be like you get the leadoff guy on and then you bunt him over to second. My guess is that you probably had a whole bunch of guys hitting second who were skilled at bunting and who were chosen to hit second for their ability to bunt and not for any other reason. Now, the way that you handle this is up to your own managerial philosophy, right? So unlike stolen bases, where I tend to prefer to steal more than most sabermetricians would recommend, when it comes to bunts, my natural instinct is to bunt less. Certainly less than they bunted in real life. In fact, what I want to do, because of what I understand about baseball statistics, is I want my players who are better at offense to hit higher up in the order instead of having a guy hitting number 2 who has a poor average but who has this like mythical ability to bunt, right? It's really, really hard for us to go back and to sort of estimate these things, right? One thing that we always forget when we're dealing with statistics and with strategy for old seasons is that these guys would practice a lot. They would play a lot of exhibition games. If you go back far enough, you have a whole ton of exhibition games that would happen during the regular season. And so if a guy was a number 2 hitter and was established for whatever team is a number 2 hitter, there's probably a reason why. And in this case, especially in the American League, the chances are really good that he probably was an excellent bunter. And it might be the sort of thing that maybe you don't see so much in the box scores, but if you were there in practice, you would notice it. There are problems, right, that you should know about. One of them is that if you bunt for a base hit, it's likely going to count as a base hit. It won't count as a sacrifice. But if you bunt and there's an error, it will count as a sacrifice. One of these weird scoring things. The other thing that a lot of people pointed out to me is that there are a lot of guys who try to bunt and who fail. You notice that a lot when you play games, especially Skeetersoft NP3. You'll get a number of situations where you'll call for the bunt and it won't end up being a bunt. Maybe a good thing will happen, it'll be a walk or a base hit, or maybe a really weird thing will happen like a strikeout, or he'll pop it up or something and the guy won't advance and is not called a sacrifice in the end, right? What that means is that the totals that we're seeing for sacrifice hits are low compared to the number of attempts that were made. And good luck figuring out the number of attempts, right? While you can go back with some old papers and find old play-by-play accounts, it's not quite as universal as you might think. And there are some problems sometimes with play-by-play accounts if you compare them because of different interpretations of what happened. Now, the best thing to look at, and this probably could be a video in and of itself, is if you read Fred Lieb's old book about the early days of baseball and his memories, he admits in the book that sometimes a sports writer would show up to the game late for whatever reason and have no idea what happened and would sort of, copy down from somebody else's scorecard and then just sort of make up his own story about what happened. Or sometimes there was no other scorecard, and so they saw the situation and sort of came up with what happened on their own. Right. So those of you who believe in the sanctity of baseball statistics do need to be warned that there are some instances in which those old box scores may have nothing to do with reality. And it may be the case that eventually we discover like old score sheets or something that prove that certain games were completely mishandled and misscored right from the beginning. I mean, that's the way that it is, right? That's the way that it is with baseball. I mean, if you get your mind out of all of the sabermetrics and all the strategy and all of this stuff and treat it for what it is, which is a game that is mostly a kid's game and originated as such, what you will notice is that it's actually a lot of fun to just sort of sit back and watch. And if you do that, you take a lot of pressure off of yourself and you can relax a little bit and not think so much about stats and computers and all this other stuff, right? It's kind of fun just to sort of let the game kind of flow out in front of you. Though the stats are interesting, there is another game absent the statistics statistics that is also quite interesting that a lot of people ignore. Anyway, there you have it. I'd love to know what you think, though, about the sacrifice bunting in replays and when to call for it and when not to. And especially if you have any ideas for how to make some sort of more automated system or something that would make this more automatic. I don't know of any games that have a very good system for that, although I think last time we talked about this, somebody had some idea in the comments. I don't know of any games, and I personally haven't played any games that have like a great system for dealing with sacrifice bunts. And this is one of those things where in a replay, you always got to turn straight to the bunts and see how far off we were, because if there are other distortions or other weird things like in the standings or the stats, that might be the reason why. There you have it. I will talk with you later. Have a good day. Bye-bye.